a lot of you folks know what we do in our innovation services group, so I won't get into that detail here, but it's amazing how close we work with Tufts Medical Center, and we are so fortunate to have them in our family, in our ecosystem here in Massachusetts, because it's organizations like that and people like this that make Massachusetts the best place in the world for innovation. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Jenny, and then we're going to get right into the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Bob. And just about a bit of housekeeping. As always, we want this to be an interactive discussion, so please ask questions throughout and we'll get to as many as we can. So just to start, Kira and Harry, can you tell us a bit about how the idea of using niclosamide as an antiviral to treat COVID developed?
Sure. First, thanks for having us here. We're delighted. And actually, Bob said everything I would possibly say, which is about the importance of this kind of work. So thank you, but we'll try to add on a bit. Actually, I consider myself a translational researcher, and that is somebody who tries to bring things from the bench to the bedside to practice, to public benefit and public policy, all the way across. And until you do that, you've done nothing. And this is a great example of that. One day I got an email from president of our university, Tony Monaco, saying there's a postdoc out in Medford who's been working with Zika virus, and she'd been using niclosamide, which is a drug used worldwide for the last 30 years for tapeworm. She thinks there are some antiviral properties. Would you be willing to talk with her? Well, sure, of course, that sounds pretty exciting. And her data were stunning and very convincing. She'd worked with Zika virus, but also other coronaviruses. And there were other bits of history about niclosamide being successful in treating like SARS and the MERS epidemics, although those kind of went away. And so it was kind of poised for that use, but mainly it's not even sold in this country because tapeworm is not a big deal here. And so, you know, we started looking into it. And so I do cardiovascular trials. So that's obviously not necessarily what you would expect, you know, to be my bailiwick, which is niclosamide for COVID-19. So we started assembling a team, and among the first people I was sent to were some, besides Dana Cairns, who was a brilliant postdoc who came up with this idea, was we started aggregating infectious disease experts at Tufts Medical Center. And maybe I'll let Kira take the story from there.
Yeah, so I was approached, I'm a clinical pharmacist. I'm not a researcher by my primary day job. But this opportunity to potentially look into a therapeutic option that seems really promising, relatively safe, jumped out at me. So between Dr. Selker, Dana Cairns, the PhD, in addition to that, myself and two of our ID physicians, Dr. Yoav Golan and Dr. Jeff Griffiths, we kind of came up with this team to help create this interdisciplinary group that is allowed, with each of our breadths of experience in various areas, have really worked together to think about a drug which is not used in this country anymore and is really only used in third world countries at this point as an anti-helminth. It has potential antiviral activity that we've seen as early as 2002. And with Dana's experience in the lab, as well as the other published literature that's coming out through drug screens, high throughput drug screens that other laboratories are performing, we're starting to get a better and better understanding that this drug that's kind of been sitting on the shelf might actually be really a potential therapeutic option for us.
Yeah, I would just add, in putting together the team, which was my only job, I have to say it's one of the things you mentioned earlier about Tufts Medical Center. There aren't walls between disciplines. And so I was able to get different types of ID specialists, Kira as a pharmacist, and also a person who'd run trials for us in our clinical research center, Dorothy Dolko, and then a great administrative team all together. So everybody was doing a different piece of it. And that I think is another piece of this, which is team science and means having people with complementary, not overlapping disciplines. And that basically we realized that the numbers of people were getting higher and higher, and we needed to get this study going. And we thought we could perhaps get it going within a couple of weeks and maybe even have an answer a few weeks after that. Good news is, and bad news, is that the numbers have gone down a bit. So it'll take us probably a few more weeks. But we really realized that time was of the essence.
So what do you have to do from here? I mean, you've come to this conclusion. What needs to happen to make this work?
So we're currently in the process of launching 2 clinical trials. The way coronavirus causes its disease is first it infects the human body, sets up a reservoir, and replicates. After it's been replicating for a while and that reservoir grows, it then causes the significant disease that we're seeing that's causing all the morbidity and mortality. What we're hoping to do is to really chip away at that reservoir early on in disease. We want to look at it in 2 different ways. The first way is to administer niclosamide or placebo to patients who test positive for coronavirus. If we give it to them early on in therapy, we hope to chip away at that reservoir and decrease their viral shedding. Their viral shedding not only is what contributes to their ongoing likelihood of developing clinically significant disease, but it also impacts their ability to spread to other contacts, their household, other household contacts and other people that they might interact with, especially as the world is starting to reopen.
And these are people in the community, not in our hospital, because that's
Correct.
after all where the spread happens. That's where most of the patients are. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sure, absolutely. And that's exactly it. You know, we have some drug trials for the really sickest of sick. This is really meant for the people that might progress to become sick. So as I mentioned, that's our first study that we're looking to mitigate the viral shedding and transmission of the virus. The second phase of the study that we want to do is looking at patients who are, again, in the outpatient setting, who test positive for the virus and have 1 or more risk factors for developing severe illness later on. We know that patients who are older, who have many comorbidities, potentially those who are smoking, all of these contribute to a high risk for developing very bad outcomes if you do develop clinical symptoms of coronavirus. So therefore, once we've evaluated the viral shedding aspect of this drug, we will also want to evaluate its likelihood from preventing hospitalizations and other bad outcomes that come from being infected with COVID-19.
Oh, wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing those details. It sounds very promising. And you talked a little bit about kind of, how common this drug is. You talked a little bit about the safety profile. I'm wondering if you can share a bit more about what other benefits niclosamide has compared to other drugs being considered. I mean, we're hearing a lot about the drug that President Trump is taking every day. And, also maybe any challenges, associated with this specific drug.
I'm going to let Kira describe this, but I just want to add one little thing that the listenership might not realize, and that is that, when you think about what we can do against COVID-19, given it's about 10 years to develop a drug, 10 years from now is not an acceptable time to come out with a new drug. So the first thing you need to do is look at those drugs that are out there and do what we call repurposing, and look for things that are out there that are shown to be safe, like niclosamide has been out there for 30 years. And so that's why we've taken this approach. And hydroxychloroquine and these other things that Kira will talk about also are all repurposed. Remdesivir, they've been out there, so that gave them a head start. However, now the question is which one should we use?
Absolutely. And when you look at this drug compared to things like hydroxychloroquine or remdesivir, there's a couple of things that are working in its favor. So the way niclosamide works as an antiviral and against SARS-CoV-2, it's got a relatively similar mechanism of action to chloroquine in that it increases the pH of the endosome. And by doing so, that inhibits the ability for the virus to replicate. Normally, the endosomal space is very, very, very acidic. And by increasing the pH, it makes it difficult for the virus to kind of set up shop and replicate and cause that reservoir that we're trying to prevent. Now, the way that chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine do this is that they are bases and they get trapped and they kind of need to concentrate inside to be able to elevate that pH. Because niclosamide is an acid, it actually extrudes protons and doesn't need to get as high concentrations inside the cell. So because of that, it doesn't need to accumulate, and it's more potent. And so we're able to essentially get away with using a little bit less of a drug that could have strong, very potent benefits. We've seen and heard a lot about the safety of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine in recent days, both in the medical literature and in the lay press. The one good thing about one of the key factors about this drug is that it has been used for decades. Niclosamide's it first hit the market in the 1960s and has been widely used globally since then, with really minimal side effects. A little bit of GI issues sometimes, especially with the higher doses. But even when it's been investigated for alternative indications as a cancer chemotherapeutic, it still is relatively well tolerated, with really only GI symptoms being the major side effect. Conversely, looking at some of the new data about hydroxychloroquine, not only has it been shown to not save lives in patients taking it for COVID, it also does increase the risk of cardiac death. And those cardiac side effects are very worrisome, especially knowing that patients who are infected with this virus are already at risk for cardiac outcomes. So the safety profile is very favorable. It can be used in children, the safety profile of niclosamide, it can be used in children, it can be used in pregnant women, and has safely been used for a very long time in those special populations. So we think that between its safety, its efficacy, and its potency, it's likely to be a really beneficial outcome. The way scientists evaluate potency of a drug, or at least an antiviral, is by looking at something we call an IC50, the inhibitory concentration to inhibit 50% of the virus. Now, by looking at, when you compare the IC50 of niclosamide, which has been measured around 0.2, to remdesivir, which was around 8, or chloroquine, which was around 8 as well, generally ranges from 4 to 8. This drug is about 10 to 20 times more potent, and some measures up to 40 times more potent than the alternatives that are being evaluated. So there's a lot of opportunity for this drug to really flourish as we investigate a little further.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it is, you know, we hear all these names out there, and I think it's really critical to understand what the benefits are. And like you said, we need to advance some of these treatments, especially until we have a vaccine. Just shifting gears a little bit, maybe you could tell us a bit more about kind of the critical role that Tufts Medical Center and all the other academic medical centers out there, you know, play in the fight against COVID, and also in addressing all of the other unmet medical needs out there.
Right.
You know, why you're uniquely suited to kind of, you know, tackle this.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be, you know, talking with people from MassBio, because I was involved with the Mass Connect 2.0 episode just recently, and I got a sense of how much outreach MassBio does to bring people together, and that ultimately is part of the role of academic health centers. Academic health centers by themselves can do great research, but they can't necessarily get things out to the real world. So, you know, I used to have some kind of concern about, well, the pharmaceutical companies are just making a lot of money selling drugs. And I realized I get paid for what I do. They should be paid for what they do. Getting it out, you know, translational research doesn't stop when you translate it into the study unit. It's only really effective research when it's all the way out to benefit for the public. So, you know, the wonderful thing about academic centers is we don't have to be product oriented. We can have that kind of pluralistic, you know, wide-ranging research enterprise, and there's also patients there, of course, and teaching. There's a lot of things that make it a wonderful incubator for great new ideas, but ultimately it will go nowhere without that partnership. So the partnership is really, really important. And I mean, that's why I'm delighted to be talking to MassBio, because this is the connection to the rest of the real world.
Absolutely. And Bob, maybe you could weigh in a little bit and kind of tell us a little bit about that partnership. You know, you always talk about how academia, industry, and government, if they come together, we can solve any issue. So maybe a little bit about how that's evolved, and you know, what we need to do to kind of strengthen that partnership.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful story. And when you look back to, you know, I started on board over here. I left government to come over to industry on September 1st, 2007. And what happened shortly thereafter? Wall Street crashed, right? We went into a depression, and we were panicking because we didn't know how we were going to raise capital to keep a lot of these small biotech companies going. But we realized real quickly what our strength was. Our strength is our talent. It's the fact that we have 122 colleges and universities here in Massachusetts, and we're home to 5 of the top 6 NIH-funded academic medical centers. Like, think about that, ladies and gentlemen. So what we've decided to do is play our strength. And our job at MassBio is to really make sure that academia, industry, and government are all working together so that we can solve the most complicated problems out there. Hey, let's face it, people, we didn't become the best place in the world for this industry because the weather's good, right? We certainly didn't become the best place in the world for this industry because we didn't have traffic or congestion issues, right? Those are temporarily suspended, but they will be back in short order, and we need to address that. But we became the best place in the world for this industry because of the science. People will say to me often, do you represent the biotech or pharma companies from a policy standpoint here in Massachusetts or down in Washington, D.C., or do you represent the hospitals and universities? Well, we represent all of them. Because if we don't have the best hospitals and universities in the world, we don't have the biotechnology industry. People lose sight of that sometimes, and it's important that we remind them that, you know, and it's exactly like what Dr. Selker is talking about, that we need the science, but we also need to be able to translate it into something that can ultimately help a patient. And the science alone doesn't do that. We need to take amazing science, turn it into a company, nurture the living daylights out of it, and give it all the attention and love that it needs to be one of those companies that's lucky enough to be successful. You know, a lot of the folks on board, they know I have a kid with cystic fibrosis. It took us, 18 years and over $13 billion to invent a drug that finally worked for him. Why does it take so long? Because it's hard. And now we have the best and brightest working, day and night to try to invent therapies and vaccines quicker than we ever humanly possible to have. And that's why it's so exciting to hear them talk about repurposing. You know, the safety profile's covered. Let's get into the efficacy and let's bang this out quick because the people of the world need it. I'm going to stop again. I start getting excited, Jenny, and I apologize to our guests. But what you guys are doing for humankind is so important and so exciting. So thank you for everything you do. We're doing the easy part here at MassBio by being the convener, believe me.
Thank you, Bob. We love your excitement. That's what we come here for.
I don't know if I drank too much coffee or I'm really getting excited or a combination of both, but thank you.
And, we've talked a lot about Massachusetts and how we've already played an outsized role in fighting this pandemic in terms of developing these treatments, vaccines, tests. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how do we advance these clinical trials? We talk about it all the time. Drugs can take up to 10 years to develop. We don't have that time. So how do we advance clinical trials and how do we ensure patients have immediate access? And how can Massachusetts especially lead in this regard?
There's a lot there. First of all, I must say that for making clinical trials more accessible, we're in our setting up for the niclosamide trial, we're also making a platform that we can use for many other community-based COVID-19 trials, because obviously we don't want to be doing trials just in people when they're terribly sick and in the hospital or the ICU. We'd like to prevent that. And niclosamide has the opportunity, of course, to reduce spread as well as improve the patient's condition. But we want to be able to test many other studies. So we're setting up a platform which we hope all people will use, and we'll make it available for just that. The other thing is, to get things out there is really tough, especially for low profit, non-patented drugs with potentially high impact. I've been working on some others for some while, and niclosamide is a great example. It's available all over the place. It's 24 cents a tablet, and there's not a lot of profit in that. And yet, we have to set up ways to get those low profit, non-patented drugs out there. And it might be that they should make special incentives, such as, has been done with the orphan drugs. Although, I noticed that Gilead decided that COVID-19 was an orphan drug, which I thought was, it was early on, maybe it was orphan condition. Another thing is to, get all stakeholders together, because, whereas usually we think of the pharmaceutical companies having the biggest incentives, really the benefit is to the public, to the healthcare payers, to society. And if there's some way they can come together to work together for all their benefit, all stakeholders, that would be a help. Now, what is that mechanism? Is it a foundation like in cystic fibrosis or something broader? I don't know what it is, but those kind of mechanisms need to be made. The other thing is to have just organizations that are not-for-profit, public-minded, public health agencies sponsor this, and governments should. What's heartening to me, though, In the midst of all this unsolved dilemma about how to get such drugs out there, every person I've spoken to in pharmaceutical companies and in academics and among patients and hospitals has risen to the occasion. They recognize this is like a once in our lifetime disaster. And it's actually a disaster which clinical research is the only answer. There's lots of other problems that come up in society and they have other solutions. We will only solve this through research, full stop. And everybody feels that in their heart, and they've been incredibly generous and helpful in this. And it's really been inspiring for me to be able to work on this.
Perfect, thank you. Bob or Kira, do you have anything to add before I go to an audience question?
No, let's go to a question.
Perfect. So Rachel Ryan is asking, given Harry has experience with other clinical trials and other indications, what was the experience like with the FDA this time around to get approval for the clinic? Was it different given it was for COVID? If so, do you foresee this change in other indications in the post-COVID era?
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, there's two pieces of this question. One is Harry Selker did not go to the FDA by himself. But there's this whole team of people, and we have team calls several times a week where we discuss all the details, fuss around with them. We've made, some of us have colleagues at FDA, some have colleagues other places. We've made lots of calls, but the COVID-19 turnaround for INDs for approval to do a trial has been at warp speed. I won't use that term. I'll just say it's been awfully fast, wicked fast. It's been on the order of 24 and 48 hours, whereas others can take years. So FDA has been amazingly facilitative, and so has NIH, by the way, and other federal agencies.
Perfect.
I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
yeah. And then do you foresee this changing kind of, future indications in the post-COVID era? I mean, will we see the FDA really kind of expediting all of their approvals and turnaround times?
Yeah, it's interesting. In the response to advocacy groups such as for HIV/AIDS and for breast cancer and CF and other things, there have been certain groups that have come together, and gotten faster processes. But this is a public need, and this should teach us some things about how we can make things go a little bit faster. Because even if you don't have an advocacy group, if you have a bad disease, you deserve the best and fastest you can get help. So I hope this will be remembered at FDA, and these processes will be expedited. Also, I mean, they are very small. They have a smaller budget than Montgomery County, in which they are, school system. I'd say, what you think about what the FDA does, they probably could use a little more help, as could CDC and others.
Right.
Yeah, Bob, we've been talking about a lot about how this period is just going to expedite everything. I mean, if we can learn from this and expedite all clinical trials in the future, that's just going to benefit patients.
Yeah.
You bet. I mean, we've been advocating for over the past 12 years for more resources, more funding for the federal agency that regulates our industry. Do you think Wall Street's been doing that for the SEC? I don't think so. So it just goes to show we need the best and brightest at our partners in government at the FDA so that we can continue the amazing work that's being done by this industry.
Absolutely.
And I'll just add one other piece that I really think that'll change from a result of our study here is that we're doing this largely via telemedicine. And we really hope that can set the new standard. We don't want patients with COVID coming in and out of the hospital every other day to give us samples. We're sending everything to home and doing all of our visits via mobile phones and other video platforms. And we really hope that can become the new norm, even beyond communicable diseases, for patients who might be remote, in rural areas, might not have, even in urban areas where it's hard to find parking in Chinatown. All of these things will hopefully decrease the barriers to entry for clinical trials for the future.
That's right.
Absolutely. And just one more question from the audience. Edie Stringfellow, how has a reaction to Ken Gett's study that found significant underrepresentation of participants in COVID trials? How do we improve that?
I'm not sure to which study they're referring to, but we certainly, in terms of underrepresentation, I mean, that's a chronic and terrible problem in biomedical research in general. One of the reasons we want to do this by telemedicine is, people don't always have the time or resources to drive an hour to come into Boston, park for $40, wait for somebody to take their blood, and then go back home. This way, we meet them where they are, and also in those communities have been hardest hit by COVID-19 and other health problems in economically disadvantaged communities. And so we think, and also rural communities, as Kira said. So we hope that we want to have a platform which is in fact inclusive, is patient-centric, and also respectful of the healthcare system, so we don't contaminate the healthcare system more than necessary. So people will have their own oximeters, they'll have other instruments, they'll give samples at home, we'll pick them up by courier. We have a telemedicine platform that we use, and we hope that'll lower those barriers, as Kira said.
Perfect, thank you. And believe it or not, we're coming up to time. So I wanted to give Harry and Kira the opportunity. I mean, you're speaking to industry. You know, what is your message to them, and how else can we help expedite your research and all the other research out there?
Well, I guess it wouldn't be a telemedicine thing if we didn't end with a pitch, right? Quite simply, we realized that the rate of people turning positive for COVID-19 when we started working on this about a month ago was so fast. We needed to do something, not only because there was lots of patients that could be included in the trial, but also because just delaying treatment, if we got the answer a week or two earlier, is a big fat deal. And so we realized it's about a $3 million study we were talking about. And so to get the first part started, the part about viral shedding that Kira described, where you're through your nasopharynx and also through stool, whether you're spreading it, and also as an indicator of being, cured, we started that study using Tufts CTSI resources. And the team came together with no resources, basically, just that have been just like an Exocet missile locked onto this. And we hope we'll be start enrolling people next week.
Wow.
But we still need the funding for the major part of the study, which is a couple $1 million still.
All right, everyone, hear that call to action. And where can people go to find out more or get in touch with you?
The usual methods, by email through you, or at Tufts CTSI with www.tuftsctsi.org, or through Kira or any one of us. But my email is pretty easy to remember, hselker@tuftsmedicalcenter.org.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Bob, could you give us a few parting words?
Yeah, I just want to thank Kira and Harry for the work that you and all of your colleagues at the Tufts Medical Center and all of your colleagues broader in the scientific community are doing, because, you said it right. Science is the only thing that's going to lead us out of this problem. And we all need to work together to ensure that we do that as effectively and as quickly as possible. And I think the future is bright. I think as bad as this has been, and obviously it's horrific, the pandemic, people have experienced so much tremendous, horrifying loss and loss of life, and we're so sorry and emotional about that, but hopefully we can learn from this and stave this off in the future. And without the talent and resources that we have right here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we won't be able to do that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for what you do every day for patients. We're grateful for you, and we want you to know that.
Thank you for inviting us and what you do.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, audience. We'll see you next week at 11, same time. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.